we've done a lot of talking about the Great Salt Lake and some of the issues, one, that it's drying up, and with it, historical artifacts are being revealed at the Great Saltair. There are some significant items, even if they don't look like it to you.
Archaeologist Dr. Christopher Merritt is with us this morning to talk about the Great Saltair and those artifacts. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the cool finds that you found out there. And we understand some Japanese pieces even here in Utah.
Yeah, and you think about the history of Great Saltair. A lot of people picture that modern building that's out by the marina. That was only in the 1980s. The first two Saltairs, built in 1893, burned down in 25, rebuilt in 26, burned down again in 1970. That's about a mile east. And as the lakes receded, it's really exposed a lot of the history and archaeology of that site. And when we walk around, we find those evidence of that really cool history of that resort. And so, yeah, we found very high-end porcelain, Japanese-style ceramics out there, which tells you a little bit about the life and sort of the high style of that resort back in the heyday of the 1920s.
Yeah, so give me a little more insight on what we're learning from some of these artifacts and where exactly are you finding them?
We're finding them everywhere, because back in the old days, you just dumped your trash out the back window, and back in those days, the lake was still pretty high, and the Saltair Resort really lived and died by lake levels. And you see it in the 1920s. At its peak, lake levels were really high, and so it was a great place to recreate. But then the Depression, the Dust Bowl, the lake receded, and it became harder and harder for the resort to make money. And so as that lake receded, those artifacts just start popping up underneath the old pavilion that burned down in 1970. And so we're finding soda bottles, we're finding tableware from the dining room, this fancy dining room. We're finding corks and everything else that you would expect from an old-timey Coney Island of the West resort like Saltair was.
What does this tell you about the vibrancy of that area back in the day as well? Because right now, a lot of people just discredit that area altogether.
Yeah, the tours that I've been doing the last few years out there, I hit that on the head, is that after World War II, Utahns really turned their back to the lake. And we still are dealing with that repercussion today. And my partnership with the Great Salt Lake Collaborative, we're using the Saltair story to reconnect people to why this was the most popular place to recreate for decades, from the 1890s into the 1940s. And it's changed our opinion of the lake, because back in the old days you take your family out there to go dance, go play on the roller coasters, and go have a meal. Now we do that in the mountains, or we go to southern Utah, and we've lost that connection with Great Salt Lake. And so reconnecting that really vibrant history of the big bands and all this stuff is really important for us to re-love the lake.
And I know you do, and this is a passion for you. So give us maybe some other things that you've been able to find out there that are really unique. And are they in good shape, these artifacts that are, turning up?
Well, it's a salty lake, so all the metal artifacts are pretty rough shape. You put metal and salt together, it's not good. But yeah, we're finding lots of really important items. And to an archaeologist, I get a question like, what's the coolest thing you ever found? Because the public expects us to love the most shiny, whole, complete thing.
Yeah.
But to an archaeologist, we love those little broken pieces, those little pieces that tell us something about the lives. And so we can find the soda bottles, bottled here in Salt Lake City and used out there, but we're also finding pocket liquor flasks, so people smuggling in some liquor and going underneath the pavilion.
Back then, huh?
Yeah, and so the archaeology can tell us stories that history doesn't always tell.
So are these places where you're just doing digs every day, or are you just walking along the shoreline, stuff that people can see and hopefully not remove as well? I mean, can we see you out there doing work?
We're not actively digging Saltair right now, but we do have hopes in the future to do that. And the whole bed of Great Salt Lake's managed by the State Forestry, Fire and State Lands Division. And because of that, it's protected. And it's protected for what I consider a more emotional appeal, is every time I take a tour group out there, they can pick up something that someone dumped in the 1920s, and it reconnects to maybe their great-grandfather or grandmother who met out there and got married because they danced at Great Saltair. So really it's an emotional plea. Just leave it so we can learn from it, but it also gives the next visitor that chance to connect personally to it. And that's an ethic that we try to share across the entire state, is when you're recreating and you find artifacts, take a photo, feel how that is in your own soul, and then leave it for the next person to enjoy it. And we're trying very hard to make all these lessons learnable and accessible to the public. And part of that is the public's responsibility to help us protect the site.
One final thing. I'm thinking a lot of people, this gets you kind of excited to go out, maybe explore and hunt for some of these items, on your own. And you said you would suggest that they just leave them there. But how do you know that you're not seeing just recent trash versus something that really is unique? What are we looking for?
It varies by the item, but generally if you see plastics and styrofoam, those are post-World War II artifacts. So if you're out on the Great Salt Lake and you see those, it's likely not from the historic period. But if you see purple glass, that's actually a really great indicator you're seeing from something from the 1880s to the 1920s, because that was a clear bottle when it was made, and sunlight has turned it purple. And so you can see that in mining towns in the foothills, and that gives you an indication it's old. But the ceramic patterns aren't going to look totally familiar to you. So it's a little bit of detective work, but that's the fun thing, and that's why I love the public to go enjoy these places, but just do it responsibly.
So does this mean that your posterity 100 years from now is going to be out in the dump just south of there, just looking through here? This is how great-great-grandpa used to live. Look at this. Look at this Walmart sack. They used to shop at Walmart. So
we will, and that's the fun thing. I did a public event at Fort Douglas, and I had an 8-year-old, and I was talking about the artifacts we had found at Fort Douglas, and one was a glass piece of a ketchup bottle. And the kid just looked wide-eyed and like, ketchup came in glass? But those are the lessons that we lose over time. And that's why these things are important. And eventually someone will dig up our trash and they'll be like, we were really dependent on single-use plastic for way too long.
Exactly.
Dr. Christopher Merritt, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank
it's
you.
fun
So
to talk to you about this. Yeah,
we could talk to you all day, but our producer,
I could talk all day too.
Yeah, we got to be the bad guy on his behalf. So thanks, Dr. Merritt. Appreciate it.